I briefly introduced the autofill feature in a few of the earlier training videos, and this is the actual training video on it, so if you missed them, well, I'm going to go over the basics here, and if you've seen them, I'm going to show you some more advanced options about the autofill. First of all, the definition of it is that the autofill is a quick way you can copy the contents of a cell or a range of cells into adjacent cells. So go ahead and select any cell or range of cells that you want to copy into adjacent cells, up, down, left, right. And then go ahead and hover over the lower right-hand corner of the cell that you have selected or range of cells until you see a black cross. And as you recall in an earlier training video, you get three options when you're moving your mouse around. Well, when you move it out into no man's land, you get the white cross. That means it's in selection mode. But when you get close to a cell or range of cells that you have selected and you hover over the border of it, then you get the black four-way arrow, meaning that you can go ahead and click and drag the contents of the cell or range of cells into whatever you want to drag that range into. And then when you hover over the lower right-hand corner, of course, you get the black autofill handle. That when you go ahead and click on it and you drag it down to the next adjacent cell, it automatically copies the contents over into that cell. Cool. Go ahead and hit undo, and you can do it again to the left, right, up, or down, just as long as the cells are adjacent. Even multiple cells, let go, and you get it copied over. Let me go ahead and hit undo. And as you recall in those earlier training videos, not only does it just copy the contents of a cell, but if it's like a formula, for example, let's go ahead and select a cell that has a formula in it. You can see up here in the formula bar, it's adding up the range here for the month of January for all the cells by these employees. And after we inserted the formula, I wanted to go ahead and have the same formula copied over into these adjacent cells so we can have the totals for February, March, and April. Instead of typing it in again or copying and pasting it, because the cells are adjacent, I can hover over the lower right-hand corner. Let me go ahead and click and drag and delete these cells. Hover over the lower right-hand corner and click and drag, and it'll automatically copy over not just the contents, but the other part of the autofill feature is that it looks for a pattern, because it's not going to exactly copy over what it sees here when it's noticing that the formula is going to be updating, or it's going to be relative to, in this case, the column that it's going to be in. Because the rows are going to be the same. It's always going to be rows 7 through 10 when we're talking about the range here, the totals for each month. So when we go over column by column, Excel goes, let's go ahead and update that formula so it reflects the range or the reference that's relative to the next column. Instead of C, it's now D. So you come over here. It's not going to be D, it's now going to be E, and so on. And the same thing happens when you're autofilling row by row. It's going to update that part of the formula as it goes down to the next row, but not the columns, because the columns will be the same. Which, by the way, let me go ahead and delete the range here. This only works for columns as a quick way to quickly autofill in. You can click and drag, but if you double click really fast, it actually does it only in vertical format here. And you can see that it automatically autofill down instead of to the right. Let me undo that. So you can't double click really fast on the autofill handle to automatically fill in and copy over the formula to the right here, but it certainly works when you're doing it by column. So if I delete the contents that I have here, the formula, and I've got my original here, and I want to copy that down, you can click and drag, but the shortcut for clicking and dragging the autofill is just to double click on that autofill handle really fast. And like I said, it only works vertically for your columns here. And when I mean vertically, I mean from top to bottom, and not, let me click and drag here, hover over here, double click really fast, bottom up. Let me go ahead and undo that. And like I said, it's not just one cell, it can be a range of cells. So if I click and drag and select the 4 cells here and click and drag down, it'll automatically just copy down the range that I have selected. So let me go ahead and undo that. Click off. Now we haven't talked about formatting yet, but it's important that we go over it at least now, because if you go ahead and apply formatting to a cell here, like the lowest minimum, which is the label for the lowest cells that was made in January, February, March, and April by these employees, and it was 110. If you go ahead and select the cell and you come up here on the Home tab to the font group and add some formatting so it's bold and red, and you go ahead and you copy that down, you get the little tag that comes up that says, okay, I filled this in, but you get some options. Do you want to go ahead and fill the contents without the formatting? If you select that, it brought the contents over, but just obviously not the formatting. Or you can say go ahead and just fill in the formatting, but not the contents. So when you type something else in, the formatting's applied, but again, the content didn't get copied over. Let me go ahead and hit undo. And hit undo again. and undo, and there we go. Undo it back to the beginning. There was the other option. It was called a flash fill. We'll cover that in the next training video. That's AutoFill with attitude. So you can see that AutoFill's got many layers. It does simple copying and pasting, but it also looks for patterns, and it looks for those in formulas, and if it can find one, then I'll go ahead and copy it over and make it relative so it updates in the columns. It also looks for patterns in other areas like months. If I go ahead and I come over here and click on the cell that contains April and click and drag to the right, you can see in the pop-up before I let go, just below the black cross, May, and then June, and then July. Well, that's part of Excel's programming to make it a little bit easier on you to say, hey, if you're going to type in a month, I know months, and you want to autofill, then I'll just go ahead and quickly add in. As you go from left to right, you can go top to bottom or right to left, the other months that come after it consecutively, May, June, and July. It also works for Q1, hit enter. That's quarter one, right? Click and drag down, and there's 4 quarters. What happens when I go beyond it? It goes back to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? It doesn't go to 5. So Excel already has some programming in it that it can look for patterns as far as months and quarters, and let me delete that. And for those that we want to set our own patterns for or find a pattern for, we can. Let's start with something simple. If we type in number 1 and we click and drag the autofill handle down, it's always going to copy 1. There's no pattern that Excel can look at and go, okay, the next one should be 2. But to establish that pattern, we just need to give the autofill feature something to work with, just a little bit more. So instead of 1, if the next one should be 2, then that's enough for autofill that if you select that range and click and drag down to go ahead and, as it can see, from 1 to 2 is just by 1. So when you go down to the next cell, it goes, well, the next one should be by 1 because you set the pattern here with the selected range from 1 to 2. Let's kick it up a notch. Let me delete that. How about if we went 1, 3, what's the next one going to be? Go ahead and select the range and click and drag down, and I'll do it every 3. And like I said, you get that little drop down options tag that you can go ahead and just copy the cells and say, no, I don't want to fill in the series. I just want to copy it, which means that I started off with 1, 3. It's copying it 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. You can change that to fill series. You can change it to a fill formatting only, fill without formatting, and like I said, flash fill. We'll talk about that in the next training video. And there's the basics, at least for just simply copying and pasting, again, only to adjacent cells, and then copying and pasting, but with a pattern that Excel can recognize. And then the next one, flash fill, which is a part of AutoFill, but a little bit more nitty-gritty when it comes to looking for patterns to help you out when you're filling in parts of your database.